Oh, hey, y'all. Oh, hello, hello. Hear me? You're muted.
Sorry, my mic was a little low there. I couldn't hear you. How are you, my man?
Fine. Thanks for being around. This is my friend Kobe. Kobe, talk to the people for a second.
How's it going, everybody? Here to talk, to clash mentally with one of the most formidable minds that I know about all the topics of the day. Today's my day off, so I went to the gym. I went to this farmer's market. We're gonna make soup later. We're gonna make kind of like Italian vegetable soup, kind of. Yeah, pretty chill day for me. I've been reading a good a bit about uh, Hamas and a little bit about kind of the situation in Israel. It was something I'd kind of begun to ignore as I focused on my personal journey, personal development. But as things pop back up, you start looking into them. So this article that I recommended to my friend Prime here, I thought was pretty interesting. I don't really know what Prime's take on all these kind of things. Maybe I'm not super committed one way or the other. I don't really view myself as very educated on the topic.
Okay, no need to stall anymore. Thanks. But but no, I so this is a topic I get like super passionate about. But I'm also like always careful about it because it's this foreign, well, two foreign nations, or one and a half. And there's a lot of history and politics there that can be difficult for maybe an American to parse. Um and so it's easy to make sweeping statements, but I get like really worked up. I get really worked up about the injustice that our Palestinian friends are facing. Um and sometimes I get ahead of my skis because of that. But like it's just how I feel. Um, so we'll talk about this. We'll read the article, and as we go along, we'll reveal our innermost thoughts on this. So I guess we'll get started. This will be a Pyrrhic victory for Hamas. Hamas being the governing body of well, just the Gaza Strip, right? Of like not like the Palestinian Authority is the other side, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I believe. Again, I am not looking into this conflict as much as I've not followed as much as I once did. I believe Fatah is the party that controls the West Bank,
Yeah.
and Hamas, which is the I think they're technically part of a coalition. I know there's another group called Palestinian Jihad, which is typically kind of presented as being kind of one step to the more extreme than them.
Mm.
And I know that I know, like, in the Palestinian parliament, they're the largest party. Or should I say, in the Gazan parliament, I should say, I guess. They're the largest parliament or party. Um, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, just a quick, kind of scope of the war or scope of the situation. Israel was occupying the West Bank until 2007. They withdraw in 2007, and there's these elections, and those elections, Hamas takes power, and there more or less have not really been elections since then, and so therefore Hamas has kind of kept that power, solidified it, and grown. From what I understand, there's a lot of connection between Hamas and Hezbollah, but I'm not as educated about that.
Mm.
And
Um,
Hezbollah is a party from Lebanon, which is a country north of Israel. There is, like, obviously a connection there, but there's a little bit of difference.
and the U.S. isn't like either of them. Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization um, by the United States, which puts it like, how do you negotiate with them if you I mean, if they were democratically elected. Now, I didn't hear that they never had elections afterwards. If that's the case, then
I might totally be wrong from what I've read, but it might be a situation where there were elections, but like
let's look
maybe it's a situation of
at
saying
this.
because they're Hamas elections, they're illegitimate. You know what I mean?
I'm looking it up right now. Why don't we figure it out?
Let's see.
What is Hamas? A simple guide to the Palestinian group. All right, there you go. And from Al Jazeera, so I'll allow it. Maybe hopefully at least a little bit trustworthy. Sure. What is Hamas? A simple guide to the armed Palestinian group. The group's audacious Saturday attack on Israel has triggered a bloody bombing campaign in the Gaza Strip. Dev told. Oh yeah, looking at the breaking news cover on here. Let's get that rid of that because it'll be distracting. Israel and the armed Palestinian group Hamas are locked in escalating conflict that has left almost 1,000 people dead in a little more than a day. On Saturday, Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel, blowing up parts of the country's highly fortified separation fence and sending fighters into Israeli communities along the Gaza frontier. The move prompted the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to warn of a long and difficult war. Israeli jets are bombing the Gaza Strip, leveling high rises in civilian neighborhoods. But what is Hamas, the group of at the center of it all? Here's what we know. Hamas stands for the Islamic Resistance Movement, and in Arabic means zeal. The group politically controls the Gaza Strip, a territory about 365 square kilometers, 141 square miles. That is home to more than 2 million people, but is blockaded by Israel. It's my understanding. It's one of the most densest places on Earth. Um,
Yeah, I do be hearing that a lot. I did a quick Google here, and I found at least the thing I was looking for. Mahmoud Abbas was elected president of the Palestinian National Authority, which is like their closest thing to a government that exists, in 2009. And then it says there have been not been any elections either for president or any legislature since those T's elections, and the only elections have been for local offices. So I believe I believe I was right. That it's like Fatah and Hamas. Hamas having more than Fatah, and those being the two that was solidified in 2006, and that's kind of remained at least official, the two main parties, because there's not been any actual election since then. They keep getting postponed.
hmm. It's never good for democracy. Oh, we just don't have any time. We're definitely gonna have one today, but it's like slightly drizzling. We're gonna
I,
I'll push this
I, I
back for another 2 years.
I've been reading a little bit about Fanon, because obviously Fanon, who is a writer that justifies a lot of anti-colonial violence, has been quoted a lot, and that's something he talks about something similar. He's very critical of post-colonial elites, and he kind of makes a very similar point, which he says like pre-colonial elites, when it's colonialism, they would do anything for an election. We are told, the populists are completely educated. They would not. You can even it's racist, and you're accepting the colonial mindset if you say anything. But then the second they become power, they're like, guys, we have to teach everybody real, a language first. We can't have an election before everybody speaks the same language. We can't have an election while we still have political extremists. What the hell? It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I like to talk about the excusing violence, or what you said, the anti-colonial violence. I like to talk about that later on, so put a pin on that one. But
For
yeah,
sure.
let's run through this article. It's not too long. Um, the group politically controls Gaza Strip. Okay, that's home to more than 2 million people, but is blockaded by Israel. Hamas has been in power of the Gaza Strip since 2007 after a brief war against Fatah forces loyal to the President Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian Liberation Organization. Um, when was Hamas formed and what is its aim? The Hamas movement was founded in Gaza in 1987 by an Imam, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, and his aide Abdul Aziz al Rantisi, shortly after the start of the first Intifada, an uprising against Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. The movement started as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and created a military wing, the Iz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. Sorry, folks, not even close. My pronunciation. I do apologize. To pursue an armed struggle against Israel with the aim of liberating historic Palestine. It is oft It also offers social welfare programs to Palestinian victims of the Israeli occupation. Well, great. So it's a movie that starts off your Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Hmm. Okay, interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's something that's a little interesting. The second name there, the is Al Din Al Qassam. That guy right there was like a legendary guy from the Arab Revolt, which happened I think in like the 1800s against British colonial rule. So he's kind of like a Muslim Lenin. You can kind of view him as, you know what I mean? Like he's like this like
Hmm.
big guy that did an uprising, or maybe it's else. The I need to read more about the Muslim Brotherhood, but they're very very interesting. Again, like that's very like from what I understand, they're kind of like this. The first of the you have these parties. Iran is run by them. Hezbollah, Hamas. They're like half militant, half political organization, and like half the guys all wear suits and half the guys dress like the Taliban. And I feel like the first one of these was the Muslim Brotherhood. So yeah, that's a gap in my knowledge I want to fill.
Yeah, the Muslim Brotherhood. Like I mean, just the name makes it like super easy for Western media to vilify them. And I'm not like here like making them for defense of them or anything like that. It's just that like if you want to design a group that would be easily obfuscated, like their like actual goals and like their internal politics that is like easily obfuscated by Western media hysteria, then like Muslim Brotherhood would be at the top of that, right? Um so yeah, like educating getting yourself educated from a like as a Westerner who doesn't know like the language or anything like that makes it very difficult. You know, like from just from a distance. So just like all this is why I said like I always feel um cautious or anxious when I talk about this issue because like so much of it is difficult for me as a Westerner to pierce. With like the layers of bias like through like you have to dig through when looking at Western media. So yeah. But you know, try our best. It also off. Okay, yeah, I got that part. What are the Palestinian group's principles? Unlike the PLO, Hamas does not recognize Israel's statehood, but accepts a Palestinian state on 1967 borders. We shall not waive an inch of the Palestinian home soil, no matter what the recent pressures are, and no matter how long the occupation. Khalid Mashal, the leader in exile of the Palestinian group, said in 2017. Hamas violently opposes the Oslo peace accords negotiated by Israel and the PLO in the mid 1990s. It is formally committed to establishing a Palestinian state within its own borders. It has pursued this aim through attacks on Israeli soldiers, settlers, and civilians, both in the occupied Palestinian territories and in Israel. The group, as a whole, or in some instances, its military wing, is designed as a terrorist organization by Israel, designated by Israel, United States, European Union, Canada, Egypt, and Japan. Yeah, like I mentioned before. Oh, this is a nice little graphic. Israel-Palestine conflict. The besieged Gaza Strip. Since 2008, Israel has waged 4 wars on the Palestinian territory, killing thousands of people, mostly civilians. The Gaza Strip has a population of 2.2 million, one of the most densely populated areas in the world, like we were saying previously. So you have North Gaza, Gaza City, Deir al Balah, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. I think I've only heard of Rafah in Gaza City. But so we have the occupied West Bank, occupied East Jerusalem. Gaza is Tel Aviv, Ashud. Uh, so Gaza here is on the left side. All right. Okay. So and West Bank is a bigger territory. But like both sides. So Gaza is the one in gray here, but Gaza and the occupied West Bank that's also Palestine.
While we have this map up,
Yeah.
looking at that, I'm kind of mainly thinking of the sort of map in the circle there.
Uh,
Just looking at that, it is I think it tells you a lot about the media bias in the West, that this conflict could ever possibly be described as Hamas invades Israel. What the fuck? There's not. It's literally two pieces of little land cut up. One of them literally was cut with an X-Acto knife, and
yeah.
the other one looks like it was literally. It looks like what it was, which was it looks like it was a war boundary that a ceasefire was drawn on. It's just. I mean, we can sit here all day, and I think we can talk about the unbelievable horror that was inflicted at at places like the dance party or nightclub or whatever. But it just you can't even have the conversation when it starts with the first step is a mischaracterization. The headline being Hamas invades Israel. The, Israel invaded Palestine almost 100 years ago. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Israel's been occupying Palestine, and we just ignore that. We don't talk about it in the states, right? And at least in other the nations, they say that like, oh yeah, it's occupied territory. But here in the states, we're like, no, these like we pretend like these are two like co-equal sides. And like Palestine tends to be a bully against the poor Israelis. So it's like just and the U.S. is like the dad in between two children who just can't get along. Like so many things, but it's good to have. This is a useful map, I guess, especially for Westerners like us. Just getting a sense of like the geography of the situation. But yeah, so scrolling down, who are its allies and supporters being Hamas? Hamas is part of a regional alliance that also includes Iran, Syria, and the group Hezbollah in Lebanon, which opposes U.S. policies towards the Middle East and Israel. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the second largest armed group in the region. Islamic Jihad. That's like that's difficult for branding. You know, like
It
what?
reminds me of like
Yeah.
at the store you'll go and it will say like Frosted Flakes, and then it will say like Frost Covered Flakes by Great Value, and it's
Yeah.
like liberation of all of Palestine, Hamas, Palestinian liberation, and then it's like by Islamic Jihad.
Yeah. The second largest armed group in the region are often united against Israel and the most important members of the Joint Operations Room that coordinates military activity among the various armed groups in Gaza. Relations between the two groups has been tense when Hamas has exerted pressure on Islamic Jihad to stop attacks against Israel. Um, that's interesting because I don't think like and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like in the West we don't talk about the second group, right? Like,
Yes, yeah, that's a huge criticism of media bias that the pro-Palestine side typically will make, is that Hamas gets blamed for everything that happened. The argument is they're the ones in control of the West Bank, so anything that happens in the West Bank is their fault, regardless of if they had anything to do with it. Even if, as they say here, it could theoretically be, you could have the hypothetical guy be like, please no, they're going to kill us. You can't do this attack," and he says, "No, we're Palestinian Jihad." And then,
yeah.
even if that happens, it's like it doesn't, it's still their fault because they should have sent a guy over in a truck. Whatever they had, they have nothing they can do.
Which is definitely not how we in the United States prefer to looked at, right? Like, I mean, you have like Trump, who's democratically elected, all right? Like, definitely did win his election by our fucked up electoral college, but definitely did win his election. People will say, well, that Trump's actions don't represent me. They can say that. But this Hamas is Hamas, and you should have got your shit together. So that's interesting. Like and that's what I'm saying. But this thing, like, it's also just like really bad in terms of just Western branding. The group is called Islamic Jihad, and for us, like we look at that as like a uh it's a noun, but like not like a proper noun. It's like an action. Like oh, the people who are Muslim, they do jihad, right? That's when we hear those words, that's what we're thinking of, not like a group called that. So I'm just saying that like presenting that to an audience, like in itself, is confusing. So it's just either say Hamas, you know.
I was gonna call my like Christian missionary the Universal Crusade. I'm like, people don't like me. I don't know why they don't like the Universal Crusade.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 What prompted Saturday's attack on Israel? Hamas spokesperson Khalid Kadomi told Al Jazeera that the group carried out its military operation in response to atrocities that Palestinians have faced over the decades. We want the international community to stop atrocities in Gaza against Palestinian people. Our holy sites like Al Aqsa Mosque, all these things are the reason behind starting this battle. Hamas also called on other groups to join the fight, saying Saturday's attacks were just the beginning.
So
Uh,
if we got to pause here very briefly, this is we're probably going to get into this more. So this here is obviously probably partially true. From what I understand, there's been a lot of confrontations in the last year at Al Aqsa. There have been multiple times that the IDF have stormed it for a wide variety of reasons. A lot of this comes up with these groups of non-violent political extremists on both sides, both Muslim and Jewish, will go to Al Aqsa, attempting to sort of like, they say they have certain rights, they're allowed to do it. They start doing stuff, and then one side or the other starts fighting each other. Yeah, Al Aqsa is just like the Muslim name for the Temple
yeah,
Mount.
Temple on the Mount.
Um,
I wanted to show that to people, but yeah, go ahead.
uh, and however, while that might be obviously like an inciting incident, I think something the other geopolitical analysis that I've seen that I think is a little bit more accurate is Israel and Saudi Arabia planning on normalizing ties. And I was listening to a very interesting podcast
Yeah,
that came out just a couple months ago. That's like a like a podcast for like Muslims in the UK that's talking about the situation. And obviously they're kind of they have their biases, but
yeah,
he made a really interesting point. He pointed out the ways in which I need to find the exact quotation, but he basically points out the Palestinians were not being talked about at these talks anywhere, shape, or form the close to they were in other times. It used to be that
yeah,
huge geopolitical things would happen because these different Arab leaders would see themselves as representing Palestine. In these recent talks, what the understanding was, if they don't talk about Palestine, there's going to be riots. They can't have riots. It's going to make normalization more difficult. And I think a lot of people in the Palestinian leadership saw this as what it was, which was okay. The last other than Iran, which are more likely to support them being violent, the last support they had with the Americans, the Saudis, their last proxy, they saw the normalization as the proxy saying bye bye, no more, bye bye. And I'm sorry, what you are left for you're left for the last line of support, which is Iran. And Iran is a revolutionary government which believes there should be a violent revolution to install an Islamic government. That's just the reality of the situation. You know what I mean? And so I would say that I think the pressure with Saudi Arabia, that I think is a little bit more. Obviously, I'm sure that people in Gaza are not too thrilled about whatever was going on at Al Aqsa, but that happens that's been happening forever, right? The new thing that happened was the Saudi Israeli relations.
there have been raids. Yeah, so yeah, but there are lots of reasons. There have been raids into Palestinian territory that killed a bunch of people. So I watch Democracy Now every day. Like at the very least, the headlines rundown, right? And like unlike most news shows, like they continuously report on this, right? Like and they when there is like even relatively small developments, they'll like throw that in. And so they've been reporting. I've been hearing like for a year straight, like every time I wake up, right? That's like literally one of the first things I do is watch this video, right, from them. And they talk about another child dead. They usually just report on kids, but like even then beyond that, there are adults who are just killed by these raids, and they're like, and most of them are just like innocent individuals, who wrong place or wrong time, or maybe they were protesting, right? Because there were a whole there was a peaceful protests, like going up against like the wall, right? So Israel, Palestine are separated by like literal physical walls. The Palestinians are fenced off, and so they were uh, like these large mass movements for months. I'm not sure if they're still going on, but like it's like for peace, for tearing down these walls, and a lot of people got killed there. There were like Israeli snipers that were just like picking off peaceful protests, like from miles away, right? Like from like a crazy long distance away. Not like they were threatened. You know, they said afterwards that they're threatened, but like how police are threatened by black people. You know, like that are running away. That's how they were threatened, and they would just like kill these people on a regular basis. I just like kept hearing about this non-stop. So that's just like one part of it. But I love having my friend Kobe here to bring in this other part that I wanted to talk to about as well. Is that yeah, Saudi Arabia? I remember hearing the news that they were going to like normalize relations with Israel, and like the first thing that went to my mind was Palestine when I heard that news. This is like months ago when they first started talking about this. Um, and just like, oh, okay, I guess fuck them then. Like fuck the Palestinians, because that's over. You the moment that you went down that road, and like as it went on, less and less talk about that. MBS, I guess, doesn't fucking give a shit. Like and like I get it, geopolitics. There's always more than one thing on the table. But like for this particular thing, it was clear that they were just dropping the issue. That they saw a number of advantages. I I I I remember there was like a was it I think this was oh, what's his face? Jared Kushner. I feel like Jared Kushner had like a lot to do with this moment. With Saudi Arabia normalizing ties with Israel. Um, I don't want to get ahead of myself there, but like I'm sure I've heard that like he had a lot of efforts here to make that happen. And there's I have very little reason to not believe that actually. But I'll leave that alone for now. Anyway, let's try to work our way through this one article before we get to the main article. All right. Um, and anyway, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple of the Mount. I hadn't been familiar with this name until like a year ago, I think. Because anytime in Western media that we talk about it, it's like Temple of the Mount, right? Like, do you get that feeling as well, Kobe?
Yeah, I'd probably count that up. If anything, I think that's probably a Christian bias less than an
Mm,
Israeli bias, because Christians
mm.
call it that too, and we live in Christendom more or less.
Yeah, yeah.
Al Aqsa is the term they use. Just that's just the Arabic term. So, but I do think though that what point you could make is there's there it's there this is what is when you realize people use selective nuance, it is important. It is a nuanced issue. Both Jews and Muslims view this as a holy site. You call it simply Temple Mount, and you don't, kind of give the cross reference there. Many people, I think that the assumption that you are pointing out here. If you told me there was a place in the Middle East called like Saint Andrew's Rock, I'm gonna go out there and assume it's probably a Catholic site because that's called St. Andrew's Rock. If you didn't tell me, oh well, it's also called El blah 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 blah. Okay, well now that seems like it's probably just a universal site there because there's two. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it felt embarrassing because someone I was talking to were referring to this. I'm like, oh, I don't know what this is. Could you like? And then they said like, oh, Temple on the Mount. I'm like I've heard about this many times. I've heard about the struggle for this building, this blasted building for decades. I know of this thing, but it's just like I had literally never heard the name. Well, it's not that I remember ever heard it referred to that. And yeah, it does shape the way you look at it, because we like, why not like occasionally refer to it, or just like give a list of names, just from the Palestinians' perspective, this is why they are feel this way, right? But we don't even bother with that. So I just want that's why I wanted to show this, because I was confused. Maybe other people were confused about that too. So it's the Temple on the Mount. So you probably heard at least that name in the news, and it's holy to the three great religions. Okay. So or the Abrahamic religions, excuse me. Um okay, Hamas also called other groups to fight. Is Hamas targeting civilians? Osama Hamdan, senior spokesman of Hamas, told Al Jazeera that the group was not attacking civilians, even though the group's own videos have shown its fighters taking elderly Israelis hostage during the fighting on Saturday. Rights groups such as Amnesty International have also pointed out that Israeli civilians have been killed by Hamas, but Hamdan insisted that the group was attacking only settlers living in illegal settlements, whom he described as legitimate targets. Those would be civilians. But like, okay, so okay, I'm gonna save this part for later. But let's move past it, because we'll end up like talking on this for like a half hour at least. So, but we're gonna get back to what that means. You have to differentiate between settlers and civilians. Settlers attack Palestinians, Hamdan said. Asked whether civilians in southern Israel were also considered settlers, Hamdan said everyone knows there are settlements there. We are not targeting civilians on purpose. We had declared settlers as part of the occupation, part of the armed Israeli force. They are not civilians, he added. How was the group able to carry out the attack? Hamas said its fighters took several Israelis captive in the enclave, releasing videos of fighters dragging bloodied soldiers. It said senior Israeli military officers were among the captives. The videos could not immediately be verified, but matched geographic features of the area. Fears that Israelis have been kidnapped evoked memories of the 2006 capture of soldier Gilad Shalit, whom Hamas linked fighters seized in a cross-border raid. Hamas held Shalit for 5 years until he was exchanged for more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners by Israel. Wow, that's a pretty good exchange rate. Hamas also sent paragliders flying into Israel. I've seen those videos. The Israeli military said the attack recalled a famous assault in the late 1980s where Palestinian fighters crossed from Lebanon into Israel on hang gliders and killed 6 Israeli soldiers. Okay, and that's the end of that.
Yeah, that last bit is kind of crazy. It kind of confirms in your mind that history has begun again, where people are like, I feel like like the invention of new war tactics.
Yeah,
Once that starts going on, shit's going crazy. When people
yeah.
are like, "What if we do this?" Like, bro, I have to wonder. You wonder if there's some Palestinian guy who was like coming home from the Jihad one day, and he like puts his AK down, and he looks at his son playing Fortnite, and he's like, "MashaAllah, I have a great fucking idea." He calls and he's like, "Guys, I have an idea. I know what we must do."
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be a paraglider, right?
One way trip. That's a
Yeah,
one way
one
trip.
way trip, 100%. Like, I'm not even sure I'm getting like to the ground alive. What the fuck? If you see these videos, they're like they're gliding at a leisurely pace. You know? You're gonna get shot. In Israel, the Israelis are very well armed.
Yeah.
You gotta get fucking shot.
Yeah.
So okay. Um,
You know, jokes aside though, because
yeah,
this obviously is a very serious topic. Something I do have to think, just that very last, that very last little bit there. I read an interesting quote today from the book Black Jacobins, which is a book about the Haitian Revolution. And basically, it says, it's paraphrasing, I think, somebody, but it says, the more technologically and sociologically advanced society demonstrates to the lesser technologically and sociologically advanced society, it gives it an image of its future self. And it's making this in comparison. It's talking about the brutalities with which the slaves, when they freed themselves, that they enacted upon many of these French populations. And basically, the point that it makes is this was the rules of engagement with which were set for decades, for generations, by the French slave class, and that many of these kind of tortures, that these things were had long traditions in Santo Domingo and the Haitian society. These were not just random savageries which were cooked up in the minds of these slaves. These were the things done unto them. Um, there are many, there are so many examples. There are so many little towns you can name, and if you say the name of the town, in the same way when you say the word Warsaw, you think of the term ghetto because you think about the Nazis, putting Jews into a city like cattle. There are a wide variety of towns with which have body counts in the hundreds and sometimes thousands that are Israeli massacres that happened in the 80s, happened in the 60s, happened in the World War II, where unbelievable the anything that you're seeing on video now happened to Palestinians, and many times on greater scales, and many times worse things. There 3,000. I'll have to find it. I think it was one specific. There's a specific attack, a specific event. And sorry for monologuing here, but there's a specific event where it was in Lebanon when Israel invaded Lebanon, and they were going to war there to stop some of the rival militias, and they allowed a Christian militia to go door to door and execute over several thousand. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but several thousand civilians in a refugee camp. The army locked these two people in a cage, and one side was an armed Christian militia, and the other side were refugees, civilians. This is it is, in my opinion, it treats the Palestinians as less than human to not recognize the fact that this is the way they've been treated. They're not just treating the Israelis this way out of randomness. That joke we made of the idea of coming home one night watching Fortnite. No, they didn't come up with that idea. They came up with that watching fucking Israeli paratroopers paratrooping into Israel and then killing them. they learn these brutalities, seeing it every single day. There's a horrible video of Hamas fighters desecrating a woman's corpse, and that is I think that's a war crime. I think that violence against women is one of the most unbelievable, one of the most horrific externalities of war. I think those people should be prosecuted for war crimes. They should be found. But I'm sorry, I think we all know the women's corpses have been a brutal war trophy in this conflict going back since it began in 1940s. That's just a reality of the situation. There is a wide history of rape being used as a weapon of war by the IDF, and there's a wide history of rape being used as a weapon of war by the Palestinian side. It is, I think we hit on it earlier. The situation here is not like for like. One side is responding to the actions of the other side in a vast majority of these cases. And in the same way that whether that's a small instance, like calling it Hamas invading Israel, or whether it's a larger instance, talking about this violence as if it just came up and just bubbled out of the mind of the mind of the savage Palestinian. I don't know. That's just not true. Human beings respond. We see how other people act, and we respond. Every single one of those Palestinian people either knows somebody or has somebody in their family that had what they're doing to other people done to them. And we can get into this more, but that's how human psychology works. And when you don't acknowledge that in your enemy, you're not treating them like a human.
100%. Okay. Uh, I'll respond more to this. I want to like get started on this article, but like, there so much there. Fuck. Um, in the hours following Hamas's large-scale surprise attack on Israel early this morning, and that'll be Saturday morning. Israelis on social media quickly dubbed the day a second Yom Kippur, referring to the surprise attack on Israel by Egypt and Syria in 1973, or an Israeli 9/11, not since the 1947-49 Arab-Israeli War had Palestinian Arab forces captured Israeli villages. Hamas executed a stunning military surprise, breaching the Israeli border in multiple ways and attacking more than 20 Israeli population centers as well as military bases. Militants kidnapped dozens of Israelis, apparently including children and elderly, and captured military personnel. Israeli social media and news outlets filled with calls for help from families in southern Israeli towns occupied by Hamas, sheltering in their homes as armed terrorists went door to door. This is the one that you told me. This is as balanced as possible. As armed terrorists went door to door.
In this situation, I would definitely say this, especially in the Atlantic, comparatively. I would don't consider it, my perspective, but
Okay. As armed, mm, uh, I'll call militants went door to door. The failure of Israel's intelligence and preparedness is second only to that in 1973. This is been a big talking point. How Israel's intelligence agency has completely entirely failed them here. And it's interesting because going back to like the technological differences, between them, Israel has all the advantages. In fact, like Israel like sells its intelligence apparatus out to the world. Like that's like a big source of income is its intelligence. It's like, well, look at like we have to because we're so besieged, on all sides. We have to have an advanced intelligence operation apparatus. And so like they sell these products to places all over the world, including like just like regular corporations, American corporations that use it to then spy on us. That's like a the Israeli intelligence industrial complex. It's just like its own topic, but that thing that it's what is world renowned, famous or infamous, did fail completely here. And so it's interesting that like there's such a difference in capabilities, but they didn't see it coming. But what are your thoughts on that?
no, yeah, I agree. I don't really think I have everything to add. It is definitely. I didn't know. As you said, there's been a lot of internal fighting going on with it in Israel. They're, between the government trying to form a government. They're trying to like put Benjamin Netanyahu in prison, or he's trying to change the government. I could see that as probably maybe kind of in the same way there are pro-Trump and anti-Trump people in the CIA and the FBI. If pro-Trump, anti-Trump, was as massive of a thing compared to what was going on with Bibi, I could see that kind of like causing the FBI and the CIA to not be able to work as efficiently. You know what I mean? So if I definitely could see Hamas using the instability of the government as an opportunity. You know what I mean? In other words,
But this Hamas victory might prove empiric. In fact, Hamas itself might have been surprised by the extent of its initial success. I mean, I'm actually probably sure they were. Like, it went as well as it did. The trauma in Israel today should give pause to those thinking that Israel will simply act against to a short tit for tat. As bad as things have been in Gaza in the past 2 decades, and they have been terrible, the coming weeks could prove even worse. Uh, Israel will simply act once for it. I mean, like, I don't know. If you definitely believe that there will be a short tit for tat here, then you certainly have not been following this, and that
yeah, I feel like that's like It's like hope on the level of delusion.
yeah, yeah. For much less, the Israelis have done much worse. So, like, I'm waiting for the white sulfur. If they haven't, or phosphorus, excuse me, white phosphorus. If they haven't deployed that yet, they're going to deploy that soon. That's the thing that Israel likes to throw on civilian populations. Israel now likely will not likely go to great lengths to hunt down those involved. The Israeli Defense Forces have already begun bombarding the Gaza Strip. Once they finish clearing Israeli towns of Hamas militants, they will turn their focus in earnest towards Gaza. The government will feel immense pressure to send ground troops into the Gaza Strip, perhaps even to end the decade-and-a-half long bloody and stifling stalemate with Hamas and topple the group militarily. Israel has refrained from doing so to date, in part because it would be an extremely bloody affair. Israel has had no answer to the question of what might replace Hamas and still doesn't. That the Israeli public will demand decisive action, including ground operations, even if these again fall short of complete takeover of the Strip. Israeli sensitivity to POWs and MIAs uh, is world record setting. The current Israeli sensitivity to POWs. Oh, maybe their own POWs. Because I'm thinking, like, this was confusing me. Like, I thought,
Yeah,
like,
that's a really badly written sentence right there. I think they just mean like they're willing to kill a lot of civilians and blow shit up to get their guys back.
yeah, they're looking to get Israeli soldiers and Israeli civilians as well back and like take extreme actions. At first, I'm thinking they're talking about Palestinian POWs that they take. I'm like, oh yeah, they treat them so well. Like,
Hey,
no,
oh, they have so much.
no. All right. The current Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, was himself released from an Israeli prison with more than 1,000 other Palestinian prisoners in exchange for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, which we talked about before. Sinwar now holds dozens of Israelis. The Israeli government faces a conundrum. Enter with force and risk many more Israeli casualties, both military and civilian. Refrain from it and find yourself at the mercy of a terrorist or um you'll find yourself at the mercy of militant Palestinians on your border. Freeing all Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives. See, look at this. Look at this. Look at this. Right here. You see the problem with this, Kobe? Freeing
Well,
all.
yeah, lumping them together. Well,
No,
I do believe. The next part of the sentence, as these organizations demand, I do believe that is a current thing of Hamas. Is that anybody that was arrested, kind of Hamas do be asking for very wide ranging prisoners stuff, including for Palestinian Jihad. So
no, no, no. That's
I
not what
think so.
I'm talking about. Islamic and then Jihad here in lowercase letters, right? Like, if you don't know this is a group, like as a Westerner, you're not gonna this sentence is not gonna tell you that, right?
Oh yeah, you'll see it as just like all Islamic jihadists
Yeah,
or
like
whatever. I
Muslim
can see
people doing a jihad rather than the second group, Islamic,
Mhm.
capital I, jihad, capital J. Like, because we never talk about this group. I'm just being out there. Yeah. um, operatives from Israeli prisons, as these organizations demand, would be difficult for the Israeli government to agree to. Israel might eventually try to negotiate, or it might embark on a risky operations inside the Gaza Strip, with the best case outcome being only partial success. Yeah, I imagine, like, if I was planning this operation, it had nothing to do with the operation, and I don't support any civilians being hurt by out there. But like, if I were doing it, there's no way I would keep all these, like, prisoners in one spot. Like, I would have them in different areas, and like, okay, if you raid that area, then we'll like hurt the prisoners in this other area. Like, keep them in a stalemate. Like, you have to know where we're keeping all the prisoners, and then like hit them all at once, and then disable the fighters. If you want to like keep casualties as low as possible, but then that wouldn't happen. So
Well,
yeah.
if part of the perhaps I think part of the bias that you see in the framing of this, I don't. If I'm guessing here, I don't. If I'm thinking from the perspective of Hamas, I don't think Hamas thinks that they're going to keep these people. They know that if Israel really wanted to, they could come and get these civilians back, or at least make a gallant effort killing many people in the process if they wanted to. I think that again, I think all of this is a recognition of, oh, okay, Saudis abandon us. It's just us. We have to go against our alone. As it said earlier, I think they're right. This was a first punch to attempt to start the fight, and it knocked them on their ass, and they were not expecting that. I think that's I don't think there's as much of a strategy in the kind of like taking of the prisoners. It's just, hey, you knock the enemy on their ass, you realize you have a couple hours, you can take some prisoners, you're going to take prisoners. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Maybe that might be the case. I don't know.
And then you'll
Uh,
figure out what you're gonna do with them later. Because there's no shot that like imagine this. You're a Palestinian jihadist guy. You see the truck coming back from the other side of the border, and you realize there's 55 foreign nationals on the back of that truck, which you have to be the caretaker of, and your option are either brutally abuse them, and then that's going to play on the national media poorly, or give them back to Israel, which is going to give up your leverage, or be forced to then kind of make apples out of oranges, so to speak, and just try to do what you can. So
I don't.
that's what I would.
I guess I'm not convinced that like this was a part of the plan. Like getting like
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. I agree with you.
okay, yeah, yeah. And I don't think this is uh they'll need too much direction as to like what to do with these prisoners. I mean, they're going to try to gain some concessions from Israel from that, right? Now, like, it'll never be territorial concessions, no matter how many people they capture. But maybe more prisoner exchanges, maybe more material, because like Israel had been blockading the Gaza Strip, from like getting like building materials. Like they, like, I don't know if there's anything has changed on this end, right? So maybe I'm speaking about something that had changed on the ground a few years ago. But the last time I checked, Israel was blockading Gaza so that like building materials can be let in, right? So like when they've been previously been bombing this place, they weren't actually able to rebuild. They literally weren't even able to rebuild. And just like a bunch of aid has just been kept out of Gaza. And so like that'd be one thing I'd be negotiating for, is that like, yeah, we those embargoes, they got to be dropped, right? I don't think there's any way, like, I don't see that Hamas could possibly think that whatever they're doing is going to topple the Israeli government. That's not happening, right? Um so this seems like the negotiating tactic. Just like you said before, they have no friends left except for Iran, and Iran is like, this is great. Just the fighting part is good. Um, but they're not going to give you much help beyond that. So, like, if there's going to be negotiations, it's going to be through this. The United States simply will not help. The United States is all in, is not a neutral partner, it's all in for the Israelis. And so, any uh, uh, any concessions, any progress for the Palestinian people, like, you've taken down all the options. It's going to be violence. It's going to be violence. Um,
Yeah, I just I'm just sorry, just to remark something you said there. It is so curious that two of the only times that you saw glowing, heaping praise on Donald Trump on CNN was when he, to quote, I can't remember one of the guys, that he was looking at the glory of our weapons as we struck Syria, when Trump struck Syria, and when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which was something that the right wing nationalists in Israel have been trying to get America to do for a very long time, and that we have stopped doing for the exact reason that it would have be seen as an insult to the Palestinians and a kind of remark against their ability to have statehood. Uh, yeah, it's very interesting. Those are the two times that you saw many in the liberal establishment praise Trump. The two times that he engaged, helped Israel in their further encirclement of Palestine.
Okay. All right. Israel's foes to the north shouldn't overlook this moment either. In 2006, less than 3 weeks after Shalit was captured and taken prisoner in Gaza, Hezbollah launched an attack on Israel's northern border, starting a bloody war that lasted more than 30 days and brought terrible damage to Lebanon. Israel's northern neighbor, already suffering a devastating economic collapse, should hope that Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, does not make the same mistake now because Israel is feeling cornered and under grave threat. Response might be harsher than Hezbollah imagines, especially in an already reeling Lebanon. Lebanon is
Okay,
not in a
your
good.
last sentence is driving me fucking up the wall, bro. Israel has felt cornered and under grave threat since 1947 or whenever the country was
Yeah,
fucking founded. That sentence means nothing. I don't even know what that means. It's like
yeah,
that'd be like if America does XYZ with South Korea, North Korea will feel that we're at war with them. Actually, we are actually still at war with them. That never ended. They're going to continue to feel that way regardless. Like,
yeah. But Lebanon is like not in a good spot, right? It
okay,
was
and yeah, Lebanon has no ability to do anything. They're gigafucked.
yeah,
People are. There's YouTube videos on Vice. There's a really good documentary on Vice. Look up a Lebanon bank heist. There was a lady that had to go in and rob. People had to rob banks to get their money out because the banks were refusing to give them their savings, but it was their legal savings, and there's no law. So they literally came in and it was an old man with a gun, and he's being like talking in Arabic, being like, give me my savings, and I will leave." It's the most insane thing you've seen in your life. That is Lebanon. So that's the other big partner for the Palestinians is Lebanon,
yeah.
who currently they can't even get money out of their bank to buy fucking milk, and they have to rob. You have to rob the bank to go to the fucking to pay their grocery bill.
Lebanon, which has like a ton of Israel, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's like the second biggest population of Palestinians is in Lebanon. Like there's a ton of refugees there, Palestinian refugees, and like they have like these huge refugee camps, which are problematic. The way the refugee camps are always problematic. And if I'm also not mistaken, Lebanon was that the country where that explosion happened, the warehouse.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
huge, massive chemical explosion that is like again they're a big port city, so it's been a big issue.
yeah. Leveled their downtown of that whatever city that was, and killed a fuck ton of people. Holy shit. Like Lebanon is just one disaster after another. And so like to think that they would have the ability to launch an attack, I mean, I imagine they might send weapons. But like
Yeah.
that's the best you're gonna get from Hezbollah. Uh like if like I would just be gobsmacked. I would be like stunned if they like somehow entered this war directly. You're gonna say something?
Oh, okay. So something that is a little bit of an interesting. It's a part of the Palestinian story that doesn't get remarked on as much in the West, even in left wing circles. Is there's actually a lot of a difficult situation, a difficult, as you said, with it's hard to be a refugee anywhere because you want to participate in the society you find yourself in, but you also don't feel like a member of that society. You feel like you do have a homeland that's not you for one reason or another. It's been taken from you, or you've been kicked out of it. And I know that what I'm talking about here is from Syria, so I don't know. I don't want to say this in Lebanon. I don't know much about the situation there, but I know that in Syria there was a problem ever since the 1970s with like some racism or whatever you want to call it, prejudice towards Palestinians by some Syrians who saw the Palestinians. I mean, imagine this. You're living in a small town in Syria, and then 10,000 people move in next door, or 5,000 people move in next door, and instantaneously your economic life and your religious life has changed. They're different. They have it, in the same way. If you're a Catholic and a bunch of Baptists move in, there's going to be culture clash, and it's really, really difficult because it's like you see a sympathy on both sides. It's like obviously the Palestinians have no choice in this, but on the other side, a random person in Syria, it's refugees are truly an intractable problem in some ways.
I like this is just something that like I just feel deeply. Like our treatment of refugees here in this nation, right? Like, because I think some people might get on their high horse about like, oh well, we're better than that. No, we're not. Like the way we treat refugees, those are a lot of those people coming from through our southern border are refugees from various crises in Latin America, and the way we treat them, it's horrible. Like they're fucking parasites. Like Americans, Americans. Like I hope you never are refugees. Like I truly hope you never become a refugee. Like there's some sort of a civil disturbance here in the States that causes you to flee seriously for your fucking life, because the way the world will treat you will be no better. At first, people are gonna have their arms stretched. Oh, they'll see something in the news, and oh, Americans are suffering, and it's our turn to help them out. That'll be their first response. The second response is get the fuck out of our country. That like Americans are dirty, they carry disease, they commit crimes because you're poor, because you don't have access to resources, you can't work. Um, all those things will follow. They absolutely will. Like Americans, I mean, and I guess I don't want to just point out Americans because it just happens. Like we were saying, it happens to refugees everywhere. But like but America is where I live,
Mhm.
and watching Americans without any like empathy towards these people, amazing, right? Because I think just part of it is just like just I just a sliver of this at the very least is that Americans haven't been refugees, at least not in the same way, right? We've been climate refugees, well, like Hurricane Katrina hitting like New Orleans. We've been that, but we haven't been like refugees from war or some other like level of catastrophe. Um, and so like there is no like um social history, like a like a social memory of being that, and being able to like put yourself in those shoes. And so cruelty simply abounds. It's just something that's always on my mind. Yeah.
The last thing I want to say, this just reminded me. I'll send you the interview. It's like a couple hours long, so it's somebody I heavily recommend you listen to it. It was an interview talking about a guy. He was in, the interviewer. He's like an Islamic scholar, and he talked about how he went to Saudi Arabia. He was going through one of the various big museums they have there for one of the kings, and he talked about how one of these. He was talking to. His guide was a wealthy Saudi like business owner, and the business owner, they're talking about the problem of Palestinians. They're talking about the issue of crime. Palestinians, obviously, low income, you're a refugee population, lots of crime, lots of drug use, and these kind of things in the community. And he said something I thought was so interesting. He said, well, in Saudi Arabia, there's a new app that I have and he pulls up his app and he shows and he says, I can see all my cattle. I can see every single head of cattle I have in my entire ranch. And I can see anywhere they go. So if one runs away, I can just go get it. And he says, why don't we do that to the Palestinians? Why don't we can put a chip in all of them and then we can just have a big database so we can know exactly where they are and they can't go and commit crimes. And I think that what that illustrates is that it's, and no matter if we're talking about American society or Islamic society, Islamic, Saudi Arabia society, the ways in which these kind of dehumanizations, you could never imagine a American, just an American viewing 100% another American doing that. That requires that dehumanization, where you view them first as you say, a parasite or an internal alien, where you view them as they're not, they're part of us, they're refugees, or it's a little fragment of Palestine in Syria, and you don't view them in a different, and that's your view. Then those kind of behaviors, where you're treating them like an animal, that's reasonable because you're not, your first thought is going to be preservation of the Syrian nation or whatever it is. And I think that that's just something, yeah, it's something we need to kind of keep ourselves in check with. Is that it's like these populations, when you already expect them to deserve lesser treatment or not the same treatment as you, then these kind of things, which you would never assume happening to someone else, they can seem reasonable. And this guy, talks about how he talked about this idea of cataloging human beings. He was talking about this as if it was like like a helpful, good thing for them. You know what I mean? It's yeah, it's nasty.
Okay.
But you see that in you see that in America. What was the Republican thing? E-Verify,
Yeah.
which every single, obviously they didn't say we're going to chip them, but it's the step there. There's going to be a barcode for every immigrant, and they're going to have to go do the barcode at the deportation center.
I I guess I literally just cannot tell you how much it bothers me, how like it pains my soul to see how people react and talk about these other human beings. Um, just okay. Because I could talk just about that all night. But let's we'll get through this article. The United States has a difficult but vital role to play. Israel and Hezbollah have no direct contact. To help contain this deadly situation, Washington could make clearer to Nasrallah the price he would pay for intervening. President Joe Biden has already publicly warned against any other party hostile to Israel seeking advantage in the situation. Um, Hostile to
Yeah, a really
Israel.
interesting thing was, do you want to know where a lot of the conscripts that got sent, they recently got called up into Israel, got sent? They got sent onto the Lebanese border. That's something that I've seen a lot of analysis say that they're really worried about. It's sort of a joint Hamas Hezbollah attack. But I don't I don't know how realistic that would be for a Hamas, or sorry, a Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese group, a Hezbollah in the current Lebanese economy. I don't know how feasible that is. But hey,
Yeah,
maybe the fact the economy is shitty, that also puts them in the same position as the Palestinians of saying, okay, well, I got me AK, I got me truck. What are we going to fucking do? The economy's fucked. No one's going to come save us. We might as well just start this war that the view is inevitable. Could
yeah.
also push them to violence too. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe to like get treasure,
Well,
like what?
you see the bad thing happening. To quote Chairman Mao,
Mm,
punch now once, save 100 punches later. If you think punches are coming, you might as well be the first one to punch. Keep talking. I'm just going to grab a cup of coffee.
okay, sure. Um, okay. So Hezbollah and Hamas are not Egypt or Syria. Um, Israel doesn't face an existential threat from these groups despite the horror Hamas inflicted today. In that sense, the current warfare is not remotely a repeat of 1973. Um, Yet, the psychological effect of these attacks, the public outrage already emerging at the authorities who failed to prevent it, and the sense of military blunder, all these factors are reminiscent of the trauma of that war exactly 50 years and a day ago. And although not as audacious or sophisticated an attack as 9/11 was, the death toll relative to Israel's size is comparable. Um, yeah, so like, look, uh, I don't want anyone, Israelis to die. Like, not a fan of people being killed, like especially like civilians. I'm not a fan of that. But like this this view of this article, just from like the Israeli point of view, right? Just about their outrage, what is this didn't come out of nowhere. This attack didn't come out of nowhere. It's not an unprovoked attack, not at all. But they don't look at it. They don't even bother mentioning the other side. They don't bother mentioning like what could have instigated this. Like,
Yeah, so this is a similar argument that many indigenous scholars make with regards to the way that we view it as the American Indian Wars. You view it as like these different discrete conflicts where one day General Plinkett shot his musket at Sitting Bear and then they fought and 1,000 men died. The many times Native Americans say, in the same way that we view the Holocaust as something that starts in the early 1930s and continues and culminates in Auschwitz. We don't view the Holocaust as beginning when Auschwitz opens its door. You know what I mean? The same kind of thing. This is not the bat. This war began with the founding of Israel and is going to continue until either Palestine gets a state or there is no more Palestine, or Israel and or sorry, vice versa. That's the when we present it as saying, oh, there's this war and then this war and this war, that pretends like there's peace in between.
yeah,
That presents it as if there's peace. There's not. There's never been peace. That's I think obviously I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I'm trying to bolster the point here. Hopefully, I'm not just double treading on tracks you've already gone on. But it's like in between the 2006 war and this war, the implication is that people in Gaza were just sipping Fanta, and one day they said like, what we got to do? Let's go take back Israel. Everyone say, yeah, let's do it. They were, as you say, you know what I mean. Each time the stranglehold becomes worse and worse and worse. I don't know. Yeah, you cannot. These are battles. I agree. They're different battles. Obviously, different engagements change and stuff. And
yeah,
I think we can make a distinction between like if there's a 5-year-old kid on the side of the road and they come up and kill it, no matter what side you're on, that's a war crime. But presenting it as Hamas has decided to do a new war, that's just impossible. It's impossibly and factually inaccurate.
um, yeah. And just a quick pause here. Guys, if you want to support what we're doing, Hanking Chads, or anything else we do on this channel, consider supporting this channel by um either support subbing to the channel if you're on Twitch, gifting bits, gifting subs, um, or using hype chat or super chat if you want us to read a comment, if you want to have your voice be heard, or anything like that, you want to respond to the things that we're saying, then yeah, help us out by being kind enough to support this community. We do need your help so we can keep doing things like this. Okay, continuing on. 15 years a day. And although nowadays is sophisticated. Oh yeah, and any if you do a hype chat or super chat, that'll be read on screen. We'll definitely read that out. So, excuse me. Um, his attack resembles these prior attacks. Another way to Israel is in a genuine state of war, not merely one more round of Israel-Hamas fighting. The psychological impact of these attacks creates political cover and political demand for Israel to go much further than it has in the past, to be willing to pay an exact prices it has previously stopped short of. So, like, I guess my problem with the framing here is that, like, and this might just be my own head, and maybe I'm like just being not treadable enough to this author. Uh, but like it feels like the way they're saying like Israel previously stopped short of these other measures, as if they did that out of any sort of sense of empathy or of restraint. Like Israel has becoming more and more far right. Like this was that self defense minister or not self defense, the defense minister. Is now like that like super like racist. He's like you know what I'm talking about, that bigot. Or maybe you
I'm
can.
not. I'm not trying to sound. I'm honestly not trying to sound like an anti-Israeli here. But when you say the sentence, what about that one government official who's a racist? 75 people from the last 50 years of American or U.S. history or world history pop into my head. I don't know who you're talking. There's many people that could be. There was a guy who called himself a fascist recently, and he was in the Israeli government. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. But it's just like the government is super far right, and like and I don't want to. I believe as the defense minister. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sorry. But like he's like openly talked about like exterminating Palestinians. And he's gone through all like he's gone through great lengths to like antagonize them. And so this dude is just having a great day, I'm sure, because it's like, well, now I get to do whatever I want. But it wasn't because of like a lack of like because Israel didn't have the resolve previously to like commit atrocities against Palestinians. They had like international pressures that maybe were holding them back. But like the government in and of itself is in no way sympathetic to their plight. They've just been finding new ways to immiserate that population, and so yeah, but then again, maybe that's not what the author was trying to say. I might just be uncharitable. I don't know.
I took this. I took this that paragraph to mean a little bit something different, and I actually and I actually I take your point here again. I think this is another way of the another perspective of the bias. Like again, one side is fighting with rockets and our Fortnite dropping guys onto one side. The other side has like the most state of the art military tech literally on planet Earth. Right? If anything, the times in which the Israelis overstep, we should hold to a higher moral standard because they have more fucking computers telling them who they are or not shooting at. If you have a AK-47 from the 1960s and you're shooting at guys, you can make a lot more of an argument. I didn't know who I was shooting at. I was a mile away. So that's one thing I would say. I think that many times they try to have their cake and eat it too. On one hand, they'll talk about how great they are and how much military they have and how great they are, how humane they are. But then when there is a inhumane action, it's instantaneously, oh well, what can we do? You guys have the precision guided missiles. I do agree there. However, I took this a little bit differently. There is a truth here, and I think that whether this is going to cause the war to be worse or whatever, one of the reasons why attacks, and there's been other attacks that have happened on Israel, that it makes the average Israeli feel like they're at a state of war with which they have maybe in their daily day life because of the level of military might. They can ignore that. the Iron Dome can blow up the missile before it gets too close. Then, in the average, many times, for many Israelis living in Tel Aviv, or living especially if you live in many of the populated suburbs, that's just life. You're just living your life. You hear it in the news, and while it is, in the neighboring country, crazy shit happens in Mexico. I live in California. I'm not like holding my gun here because I know there's a big wall protecting me, right? But what would I feel like if cartel people came into San Diego and started doing cartel people stuff in San Diego? I would feel like we're at actual war, right? I would really feel very scared in a different way. I think that that's something that it's like, regardless of whatever it is, that's the biggest victory that the Hamas got out of this is making the other side feel the same thing that they feel. You know,
Yeah. Um, and as a person who, doesn't like death and destruction, I don't know how I feel about that, right? Like, um, do I want more people to be immiserated? No, I want less people to be immiserated. But it would seem like in this conflict, well, okay, so the other article we talked about or we read might have mentioned this, or maybe it was just you who mentioned it, talking about the situation with the Israeli courts, right? So, in Israel, like this far right government, right? Turns out not huge fans of controls on their power, and so they've like weakened the court, the Israeli highest Supreme Court, right? They weakened the judiciary, and there was mass protests against this, like on the streets of Israel. Like again, for their population size, it was fucking huge. It was like a quarter of their population was like out in force or something like that. It was just like a huge amount of people who were protesting this, and love to see it. People fighting for their rights, fighting to protect democracy. They end up losing that fight, but it was a great showing. But the only thing that, like, as Westerners, uh, people who are of my persuasion, as Westerners looking at this, is like, all right, so Israelis can protest, right? There is some semblance of a left movement, right? Or at least a counterbalance. I don't want to necessarily call those people out there who are on the streets left, right? But at least a counterbalance, whatever the far right government is doing, that exists, and you guys can show up. So, like, what about like this Israeli-Palestine problem? Like, when I don't know, maybe this just might be a gap in my knowledge in terms of Israeli history. But where are the mass protests against what Israel is doing in Palestine? I also realize that's not the only thing that goes on through the minds of an Israeli, right? They have other things in their lives, so I get that, right? But like, this is one of the defining conflicts of their nation, right? Um, but like, it just seems like it was not a concern for them at all. That like like from the outside looking in, like, where is the political pressure here? They put a lot of political pressure when the judiciary was threatened. There was a pushback, so like, you guys are capable of it. You care enough, right? There's enough organization or momentum to do something like that. But on this thing, like, the centerpiece of your domestic and your foreign conflicts, right? Nothing, nothing. And so, like, when my friend Kobe, he brings up like, making Israelis feel that there are war, well, then that's what where my mind goes. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess now you'll know that this isn't like a conflict far away from you. I think part of like the allure of this far right government is that, like, we will keep this thing away from you. You can live your lives, and this won't intrude on that. They failed at this, obviously, but like, I think that's part of it, is that keep this out of me so I don't have to deal with this. Now that you do have to deal with it, like, what will the response be? So that's interesting. If you want to say anything else, Kobe.
no, I think you're bringing up a lot of interesting things. I mean, obviously, I'm not. Perhaps I think a bias that perhaps could exist in the American left is I feel like there just isn't much of an understanding of the Israeli left, and I think just to you speak to my own self, it's like part of it. It feels like I don't know. It's like it's just like it feels like talking to these people that have no power, no influence on the society. You know what I mean? You look at like what so much of the act of like what what people what people speak in the elections, and it seems like this is just a tiny little minority. And it's nice, it's lots of nice platitudes. You know what I mean? You can get people that will talk very wonderfully, and they're very good authors. But it's like, what influence do they have anywhere on Earth? And it seems like it's none. And so yeah, I don't know. I agree with what Watch said.
From the outside again, and this is why I said like from the very start, like if like, I get anxious when talking about this because like as a Westerner, it's very difficult for me to pierce exactly what's happening. But like, where is the agitation? There's a lot of agitation for that to defend the judiciary, but like, where's the agitation on this? And maybe there is. Maybe there is. Maybe like there's like a movement and they like have demonstrations, you know, like how like um uh the Black Lives Matter, right? Would just do like random demonstrations and shut things down. Or like climate change protesters will, you know, will shut things down, you know, and like try to get this to people's faces. Maybe there is, but I don't know. I don't see that. I just don't, right? Um, and I what I see and what I hear when I would talk to Israelis is like complacency. So I don't know. I don't know. So it's just how I'm feeling, and my feeling could be wrong. These attacks, one, are uniting Israelis temporarily, of course, after years of growing division, allowing the government more room to maneuver aggressively if it so chooses. The massive demonstrations of the country, if it so chooses, like as if it won't. Yeah, definitely will. The massive demonstrations in the country in recent months have now been halted. Those are the ones I was talking about, the judiciary. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to overhaul Israel's democratic institutions will likely have to wait. Reservists have shown up for duty by the thousands, including many who had refrained from volunteering in recent months in protest of the government's radical agenda. A popular theory holds that Israelis compromised only after being attacked. The prime example being 1973, when Israel reached a peace agreement with Egypt in return for giving up the whole Sinai Peninsula. In truth, because Israelis are often attacked, this argument is overdetermined. Any compromise can be retroactively explained by a prior attack. Hmm. Let me think about that for a second. The current situation might prove, not for the first time, something else entirely. If you convince Israelis that they are in a fight for their lives, the lives of their families, they will fight, and Israel remains far stronger than its enemies, today's debacle notwithstanding. Like, I just don't like the look of this. Like they were somehow the underdogs, and they were holding their fire, and like now Israel will be their hand will be forced. Right? They weren't. There wasn't violence before. There was peace before, but now they're like, oh. Now you've shown them the threat is real, and now brutalities will follow. And only if you didn't, right? If Hamas had kept the status quo, well then things would have been better, right? Like, like basically the choice for me is that like how quickly is the ethnic cleansing happening, right? Like, what is the speed? Go ahead.
I was just going to find something I find kind of interesting. So I feel like there is like more of an agreement on this from this kind of perspective in this article, and then this perspective over here, which both kind of view, as you're saying here, like I think they both kind of view the ethnic cleansing as like an inevitability, right? Like one side views it as there's no possible way that the Palestinians will ever be able to have their own state. Israel is just so much bigger, so Israel just is the bigger brother role. Versus the other view that as one side views it as a good thing, one side views it as a bad. I know maybe I'm oversimplifying this.
Could
Um,
could you restate that?
yeah, I think
Hello.
there's more of an agreement when it comes to
Okay.
the idea of like why the attack happened, right, and whether or not this pushes Israel's hand. I think there's a little more of an agreement between like the side that's like overtly pro Hamas and the sides that are sympathetic to Palestine, and then sides that are pro to Israel. In other words, I think that Hamas knew this was going to provoke their hand. I think that's what was their goal. I think that the goal is to transition out of a prolonged stalemate where is Palestine is going to be slowly strangled to a open war with which perhaps Palestine will be destroyed, but they'll be destroyed on their feet fighting, which is the view, kind of like the thing Hamas wants. And then also, obviously the idea there is a religion. I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to give into the kind of Orientalist stereotype that the Muslims are just these religious fanatics, but there obviously is an element that assumes, okay, and same with with like left wing people in the revolution. Once we start the revolution, the capitalist class will try to crush us, and people will see the righteousness of our cause and will come onto our side. I think that's obviously that's obviously going to be a view in which you commit an attack against a greater enemy. They're going to that forces are going to come down on you, and so that in response to that, David and Goliath situation will kind of show itself to the world, hopefully. And there's a reason that Israel tries to present themselves as the David and Goliath so much, as the David in that, the David versus the Goliath. They never want it to look like they're the actual one in the upper hand, because then the moral culpability falls on them more. If they have the upper hand militarily, economically, or if they really are the more advanced society, it's on them to show the Palestinians how to behave. You know what I mean? If they're not saying I agree with that, but if that is true.
Yeah. Um. Oh yeah, 100%. And that like, they like, especially within the American press, right? Like I feel like, and maybe my view on this is dim, and it probably is, but like I feel like Israel either doesn't care, or it's like the battle is already lost for its image like across the world. All it has to do is like convince the American press of this, right? Like because it's the Americans that matter and their particular opinions on this. It's how like they've been allowed to do the things they've done without like international backlash, because the Americans take care of them. And so within the American press, like we'll get articles like fucking this, like painting it as that, well, you know, Israel really didn't want to do this, but like now they got no choice. Now their lives are threatened, all right, and so they must, with like little, and I don't know. We've been talking about this article for a while. Maybe I missed it, but like there's very little discussion of any about like um the Palestinian point of view and why they might have done this, and it's just like it's like completely immaterial apparently. Um, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I definitely agree with a lot of what's being said here. When you'll notice sometimes there are certain arguments people want to have. If you'll notice, if you listen to debates between people that are supportive of Russia and supportive of Ukraine, the people who are supporting Ukraine, they want to talk about the specifics of the Minsk agreement. They have no issues talking about that, right? Because they know that if you look into it, it makes the pro-Ukraine side, or they think it does, they make them look better and Russia look bad. It's very curious that you very rarely, one of the reasons, like, isn't it kind of interesting, you just very rarely hear spokespersons for Hamas. These are people that go on, Hamas has media organizations and stuff. You very rarely ever hear this. You very rarely ever hear what their side of the story is. And the reason is they know that if the Palestinians come out and they say, hey, yeah, it's disgusting to see women getting raped. Yes, it's disgusting to see nightclubs being destroyed. That is the rules of engagement with which has been settled in this war for the past several generations. Catch up. Here's some history books. If that is the percentage, that's the image that's presented, obviously not as hyperbolic as that, but if that's presented in an emotionally convincing way, a whole lot of Americans, you know what I mean? There's been a big change in American perception on Israel in the past decade compared to the previous, and part of it's because you just give both sides of the story. There are a lot of people that are pro Israel. There are many people that point out, for example, that Palestinians are more than they have views on LGBT rights that we would view as being against against the human rights of LGBT people. Obviously, Fatah and
The
Hamas
same
are.
people saying that are like literally like evangelical Christians. Like,
I know. I totally.
yeah,
The people I was talking to there, to prime, I was speaking of the pro-Israeli liberals.
pro
Yeah, I was thinking
Israeli
like pro,
liberals. Okay, fair
pro
enough.
people that are like pro-Israeli liberals that will defend Israel because they view it as like a sort of
Fair
bastion,
enough.
like
Fair
liberal
enough.
democracies. Yeah,
Fair
that
enough.
was in my mind. But it's like from there, sorry, they kind of got me off course. All of that is the case, but you realize that's all the stuff they ever want to talk about. You very ever want to talk about this very simple argument with which Hamas and these other militant organizations argue, which is they're engaging with Israel on the same kind of footing that Israel engages with them. And the more that argument's given light of day, I think the more people agree with it. And so that's why the conversation can't even be done.
I
That to me, even say that, many people would say that that's anti-Semitic. To even say that, like, to even say that it's legitimate to give voice to the Palestinian, as this article author would say, I'm giving voice to terrorists.
Yeah, terrorists, right? He referred to them as terrorists. Um, like at one end he wants to he this person from the Brookings Center, which not surprising, right? Brookings Institute. Um, but there uh on one end he wants to have it as if like the Palestinians are like some co-equal force that is attacking, right? Like doing a military operation. But then next he calls them a terrorist organization, right? The that Hamas is uh, uh
I'm sorry. It's like, sorry for interrupting you. It's like in chat, people are saying like the entire argument is nullified when a music festival is massacred. Why can we not apply that to Israel? Any argument that Israel makes for their moral standing is nullified when the whole list of massacres against the Palestinians. That is, I believe the Israelis have a 22x death rate and a several thousand x casualty rate. More than the Palestinians. I just I don't know. That's just there's something about I don't know. There's just something about that that just seems like this art. If the argument is applied to one side and it nullifies their moral standing, then why don't we just take the epic or nihilist argument? I've argued with anarchists, and they make this argument. They say, "Oh, I'm actually for a no-state solution." Okay, well, both sides are equally evil then. I'm sorry, like that's just ridiculous. Like I'm somewhat sympathetic. Sorry for taking over so much here. Like I'm somewhat sympathetic to the argument that says imagine if Palestine had the same level of weapons as Israel, just like right now. One would argue that the Hamas is more radical than, well, at least the argument used to be that Hamas is more radical than the government of Israel. I think that argument loses for every time that the Netanyahu government brings in people that call themselves fascists that refer to there needing to be a second Nakba. I'm sorry, like, what's the moral difference between calling for a second Nakba and calling for a nightclub to get massacred? The Nakba is the term for the Palestinian the
the
exodus
catastrophe.
of the Palestinians from their homelands in the 1940s.
Yeah.
That these are officials in the Israeli government saying this. If I'm going to say that these kind of actions take away any moral standing from Palestinians, then those kind of actions take any moral standing from Israel. And America, we should just completely remove ourselves from the situation. We should have nothing to do with the situation.
Yeah, I mean, fuck. At the very least, have nothing to do with it, because it's not as if we are much of a moderating force on the situation. Like, and you know what's interesting? So let's talk about the American role on this for a bit, right? Um, like it's interesting that uh we within the press like and growing up as a child, right? Like from what I gained like through osmosis was that like America was this neutral partner, right? Like that, like I mean it's what the news presented it as, and that America is within here to find a solution, um and with the implication that they really want both sides to get along. But it's like none of that is the case. None of that is the case. That we are staunch, as our presidents all say down the line, we're staunchly on the side of Israel. We're staunchly their allies. I mean, we'll also be negotiators in this conflict, but we're staunchly the allies of Israel. And to see like the series of of foreign policy interactions we've had over the last few years, like over the Trump administration into the Biden administration, with the whole Golan Heights thing, right? With the U.S. recognizing the Golan Heights as like part of Israeli territory, and then moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, was it, I believe, and um, like the Biden administration being extremely tepid and uh, you know, uh, its response to Israel, and Obama administration, like the Obama didn't like Netanyahu, right? Like there was like animosity between them, clearly, right? But as always, what he would do is say, "We're all staunch allies. We are there for them, 100%. Right? We'll always be on their corner." And I get the feeling that Obama, like among like our last like few presidents, has been, and this is just my feeling, like the least pro-Israeli. I just mean that he was like pro-Palestinian. but like the least pro-Israeli, with his interactions. But like that's the best that we can get. That's the best we get. And I'm not saying that we should like necessarily like switch sides, and that would be like the equitable solution or whatever. I'm saying that either we remove ourselves from the switch situation because we can't be neutral, or we actually bring an international coalition into this that gives a fuck and try to find something that's a workable solution. But as it stands here, and like how the American people see themselves in this conflict, I think it's very fascinating. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I I think a lot of Americans care a lot about it because you realize how, as you said, you once you realize how much of America is the reason this happens and how much of the situation would be different if America wasn't there to back it, that you feel a level of culpability and guilt. I unfortunately I was not listening to some of what you were saying there, so I was trying to find a specific name of a person. Sharim Abdul Akleh was a American Palestinian journalist who in 2022 was killed by the IDF. They knew she was wearing a press jacket. They just murdered her because she was covering protests they didn't like. I find it kind of interesting that we talked about Camille Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia for like 2 years, and it was a huge scandal. And this other situation, literally, no one talked about this at all. This was an American citizen that was killed by the IDF. We give these, nothing happened. There's not, obviously, I'm sure there's some sort of internal investigation that happened, but media-wise, this gets no coverage. These kind of in 2022 there were strikes in which there was a clash in which 49 Palestinians, including 17 children, almost half of who were killed were children in a strike in which 2 IDF soldiers were wounded. None were killed. 2 were wounded versus 17 children killed. And the side that killed 17 children are the ones that have the most advanced missiles on planet Earth. I don't even know how. If the argument is somebody said in chat, well, what if Hamas stopped resisting? That's just I just don't even. It would probably be maybe what I don't know. I mean, maybe the 17. It would just be no. I guess if Hamas didn't resist, it would be zero instead of 2 IDF wounded. It'd be 0 wounded, and it would be 17 children killed, 49 Palestinians killed, 500 wounded. So I don't know. It's
Yeah,
just
it's like so many things here. Like I don't know where to begin. Where like okay, so you want the Palestinians to unilaterally disarm, um, and saying that well, if they don't resist, then things will go better for them. But what is the project here for Israel? It is a project to like reach some sort of like compromise for both sides, right? Like I think that type of thinking assumes like the neutral stance that Israel is like their political intuitions is to go to like a some sort of neutral compromise where we can find some sort of balance for us all here. Where instead it's like, no, we're actually ethnic cleansing these people. We are like taking away more and more of their territory. When we're talking about Israeli settlements, they're going into what's left of Palestine, and they're like plopping down settlements. They're and not just plopping them down, of course. They're bulldozing Palestinian houses. They're bulldozing them, throwing those people out. Like, and there's tons of videos you can find of them being dragged out of their homes. So I'm like, you got to clear out right the fuck now because this is happening, and there's no recourse. Taking their land, like people grew up there for centuries, right, in those areas. But that land has been forfeited. Taking that land, and then like putting a Israeli settlement there, and continuing this over and over again to further push these people out, right? Doing all of that, and once you realize that's their political intuitions, then it's like, well, if you disarm, then you have no way to fight that because they're going to keep doing that, whether they're facing a peaceful Palestine or an aggressive one. That's what happened one way or the other. So that's why I said, like this article pretends like it's between like a tense peace, right? Like the choices
between two. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. It pretends it's between two nations. This isn't nations. It's one nation and an occupied nation. That's it. Period. End of discussion.
yeah. And like the options are either the according to this article is like either a tense peace or like Israel responds, defend itself. And it's like what I feel. It's the speed of the ethnic cleansing, right? This might give Israel more reason to do more of what it was doing previously. This idea that they should just give up. So what do you think about Kobe? What do you think about this idea? I think it was in the last article, um, talking about settlers being legitimate targets.
Yeah, so I mean, in the context of the Israeli, first thing I want to say, before, hold on. I'll answer your question first. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think that the settler versus terrorist distinction, I think this speaks to a larger, which obviously are, as we just talked about for an hour, obviously both of us are more sympathetic to Israel being the cause of this, but whoever you put the cause to, the one side calling the other side terrorist, the other side calling the other side settler. This is something that I think goes to a larger problem within the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a dissolving of the enemy civilian distinction. As I've said here, this has been a situation that you see time and time again, going back to 1948, where there are all kinds of groups that get ethnically cleansed, whether by Israel or by Palestine. Many groups that get killed, and the justification is to say, well, these weren't really civilians, even though they were, say, party goers in the case of this recent attack, or they're, for example, in the attack that happened in 2000 in October of 2022, where 5 children were killed by an Israeli drone in a cemetery. The argument that obviously, the argument that they would make in these situations, they would say, well, these are not really civilians; these are terrorists. These are not really civilians; these are settlers. Hannah Arnett has a very good book called On Violence, and she responds to she's a Jewish author who's fled the Nazis, came to America, and she responds to Fanon at the time. This is a book that comes out contemporarily, and she makes some interesting arguments. Her biggest argument, basically, she says that many times violence as a means to an end can become an end of itself. And perhaps, as we were talking about earlier here, I'm sure in many cases there are probably many people that were, when if you're a commander in Hamas, it's not good for you for there to be YouTube videos of these Hamas people committing war crimes. That looks bad for you. You have to deal with that. Part of that is a blowback, and they would agree. Part of that, if you send a bunch of Palestinian militants into the other, into land controlled by Israel, it's very, and if they win, it's very quick for shit to get out of hand and for people to commit sexual assaults, for people to commit looting, for people to desecrate corpses. That is something that happens with humans. And the argument Hannah Arnett would make, and that's something I am sympathetic to, is saying when you engage in violence, it needs to be very specific. You need to know what you're doing it for. And perhaps one thing, and perhaps what a overtly pro Hamas side would say is, again, they would make the same kind of what I just said earlier, that the enemy distinction between combatant and civilian is dissolved. They would say that this has already been dissolved. That these kind of rules of war where you restrain your violence, they would say that's already been dissolved by Israel, who allow these wanton displays of violence to happen. But I would, again, I would hold to that critique, and I would be curious what you think here. I am sympathetic to the fact that I do think violence can many times become a means to its own. It becomes a self-justifying action, and I think, as you see, regardless of what your thought of the conflict is, seeing people being tortured. There's a video of a little boy being humiliated and ridiculed. That's not anything that anybody wants to see. And I think that is a result of, that can be a result of a justified violent response that ends up becoming a sort of a locust, a motor of human action by itself, right? It becomes justifying of itself.
Um, I mean, I guess I completely agree with what you're saying there. Um, I just gotta say more to the point that like the reason bringing it up is that these settlers, um, they are like soldiers for the cause, right? Like these settlers are like families, like mother, father, and children, but they end up being soldiers for the cause, in that um, like they're at the front of it. The front is that like we were just gonna take this space, and if you're going there, like it's a political act. and it's a oftentimes a violent act because that space needs to be cleared. Right, we're gonna bulldoze this town, and we're gonna take this as our settlement. Um, and like now there could be multiple generations. It could be like a generation afterward, the initial people who settled, right? But you are a settler within that situation. Um, and um, and those settlers are not like neutral and that like, oh, we just want to live here, like we just want to be left alone, um and we just want to like peace with our neighbors. Those settlers are armed and the Palestinians aren't armed, mostly, right? But the Israeli settlers are highly armed, and they go to neighboring Palestinian towns when they haven't been torn down yet. They go there, they harass, they beat, they rape, they kill, they rob, right? They'll just go in and like to a person's home, like this is ours, right? Oh, you got a nice daughter there? We'll rape her. They'll do all that. Uh, but like when there is a response here, it's like, well, you're hurting civilians. You're hurting civilians. Well, are they? Right? Like this line that Kobe was talking about between enemy combatant and civilian is heavily blurred there. And if you just go with the idea of a settler, well, a settler, well, I mean, in any colonial sense, like a settler is not great, right? Pretty much in any
Yeah.
colonial sense.
So yeah, this is where my nuance would become would begin. When we're not when we a person who has lived in Israel for 3 generations, who lives in Tel Aviv, that has had their whole family living in the urban center, both from a material perspective, and then chances are from an ideological perspective, is not the same from a person that goes out into the desert and sets up a land and forces the Israeli government to come and give them water, which is what we're talking about when we this is what the issue is. When we say colloquially settler, we're both referring to every person who's a member of the state of Israel, because they're all settlers on the land. And then we mean settler, we're referring to, there are specific people that the Israeli government calls settlers. I do believe that there's a level of, if I joined Al Qaeda and I moved to Afghanistan and I became a spokesperson for Al Qaeda, right? I'm putting myself in the crossfire of the American army, right? I agree in some respect. If you're, the people that are the settlers that even the Israeli government agree are settlers, people that go out into land that Israel doesn't even claim and try to claim it for the nation, I am more sympathetic to those situations being less than civilians. But this is where the issue of moving from a combatant civilian settler distinction to simply a settler distinction, which I'm not saying you are, but there are some people that advocate for a collapsing of this. That is not really a distinction. That civilians are settlers, settlers are civilians, combatants are citizens and settlers. Is in a war, just because something is not neutral doesn't mean that it's a hot target.
Hmm.
A penicillin, a medicine factory, a kindergarten that is in Nazi Germany is not a neutral facility, but it's not a hard target. And it would
Yeah.
be a war crime. It was a war crime when we blew up Dresden. It was a war crime when we blew up the American bombs targeted working class neighborhoods in Germany with the express. They call it terror bombing because it spread terror in the
Yeah.
German populace. That's a war crime. It doesn't matter that they were Nazis, quote unquote Nazi civilians. They're civilians. So that is where I would say is that we can, while if we I'm sympathetic to expanding it to be settler, civilian, combatant, and settler is not a civilian. Not all settlers are not all the same kind of behavior is ethical towards a settler, but there's more than versus a civilian. I'm sympathetic to that. I'm not sympathetic to a collapsing of the neutral of like any there's no more neutral. It's
Hmm.
either settler or Palestinian. That's not the case. At the end of the day, there are many people that did just in the same way that I got given my ticket as a white man in America, you got given your ticket to life as a black man in America. There are many people that got given their ticket as a random person is in Israel. The country has been around since 1948. It's older than my grandparents, right? So that's what I would that's what that's where I get uncomfortable with some of this rhetoric around settlers, and where I understand why people don't like it, and they can see obviously the word genocide is brought up all the time in every political conversation, but I can see where the logic makes sense. If everybody in Israel is a settler, and if all settlers you can do violence to them, then it becomes not that you have to do genocide, that you are ethically permitted to do it. And obviously, I
No,
don't think you support that. I don't even think most Palestinians support that.
yeah, yeah, and but like, in the previous article that we were looking at, in fact, we can bring it up again, and let me just like settler. Um, okay, it's formally committed. This is talking about Hamas. It's formally committed to establish a Palestinian state with its borders. It has pursued the same in attacks against Israeli soldiers, settlers, and civilians, both in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel. But I wanted to get the quotes that we're talking about. So Hamdan is Hamas, a spokesperson for Hamas, right? Hamdan says that the group was attacking only settlers living in illegal settlements, whom he described as legitimate targets. You have no, to differentiate between settlers and civilians. Settlers attacked Palestinians, Hamdan said. Asked whether civilians in southern Israel were also considered settlers, Hamdan said everyone knows there are settlements there. We are not targeting civilians on purpose. We have declared settlers are part of the occupation and part of the armed Israeli force. They are not civilians. So, like, yeah. Um, when I was reading this, I'm like, who exactly do you think is a civilian, right? Uh, uh like,
The concert goers, I think, really, this right here, if you take this as being true, then they have to, from their own moral perspective, they have to say the concert attack was unjust because those were not settlers. Those were just civilians. Many of those were not even Israeli citizens. They're people that came to that concert to go to the concert. And
yeah,
obviously, I think it's unjust to go to a concert within fucking, within a day's drive from a concentration camp. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't give somebody the moral justification to literally paraglide in and kill you, in my opinion.
yeah. Mars and concert canceled mid daily conflict. Um, where is this concert attack that you're talking about?
Well, so let me see if I can find it here. I'm guessing if you look up Israeli concert massacre, maybe.
Video shows militants take festival goers hostage.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, Hamas gunmen open fire. Okay, let's look at the CBS one. Um, during the surprise assault on Israel, stop the video, ban this. During the surprise assault in Israel, the Palestinian militant group Hamas Saturday gunmen opened fire on a crowd of young people during a dance music festival in the southern Israeli kibbutz of Reem near the Gaza Strip. Multiple news agencies in Israeli media reported. Witnesses told the Times of Israel that rocket fire was followed by gunshots fired into the crowd as hundreds tried to flee. The Israeli Force Rescue Service Zaka said its paramedics removed about 260 bodies from the area where the music festival had been taking place. Associated Press reported Sunday. The total figure is expected to be higher as other paramedic teams are working in the area. The music stopped and there was a rocket siren. A young man called Ortal told Israel's Channel 12, according to Reuters. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they started shooting. Haaretz, one of Israel's largest newspaper, described the scene as a massacre in a battlefield, and reported that terrorists on motorcycles drove into the crowd, opening fire.
If
Yeah,
you could pause very briefly here. I think the more that I read about this, I think any kind of justification Hamas can make, I think loses a lot of grounds here. So with
yeah,
the previous article, what they argued was, again, they make the same distinction I was making there. They say IDF, a combatant, settler, and civilian. Right? The idea being civilians totally off limits, can't kill them. Settlers, maybe sometimes, maybe you can take them hostage. Combatants. What are you going to do? Riyim, the kibbutz. A kibbutz is a secular, there's a very complicated history of Israel. Kibbutz were kind of communes that got set up at the very early history of Israel, where they were trying to be kind of secular. Many of them had socialist leanings. Many times, from what I understand, kibbutz are more related to the less religiously nationalist parts of Israel. So this is a kibbutz. This is not a settlement that was founded in 2011. I'm looking on Wikipedia and it says Riem was founded in 1949 by members of the Girls and Boy Scouts of Federation of Israel. Obviously I don't know what the history behind that was. Maybe this was a Palestinian village, but I'm assuming that probably would be on the Wikipedia page if it was ethnically cleansed. That typically is included. So if this is the case, that this was a newer community that was founded by Israelis in the 1949, this is not a settled community where they're kicking out Palestinians and checking up shop. If this is a music festival in a secular non-settlement, then they're breaking their own rules of engagement. Going by what Hamas says, they're breaking their own rules of engagement. So you should. I think that is where when you see the people in the West supporting this, doing or kind of trying to play, talking about it in ways that are I think unethical. Even by what Hamas say, they're breaking their own moral ethical guidelines. This is not a hot target. I'm sorry. Stupid college kids flying into your country from out of the country. Not only is that a stupid target from strategy, that's an unethical target. Those people do not deserve to die for being stupid. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And this is just exactly what you were saying before, where the violence that's not controlled becomes its own end. And I mean, even from from that previous statement that I read about from Hamdan, the Hamas spokesperson, right? Like they seemed like they wanted to pretend that they were making some sort of distinction here, but it was the lightest of distinctions. And among Palestinian or like radical Palestinian thought, like yeah, everyone's a fucking settler, as you're saying, right? Like it's all flattened out, and they're saying like, well, we know there are um settlements in southern Israel. Well, okay, sure, but like, are
There
you?
are settlements in northern Israel and central Israel and West
Yeah,
Israel and East Israel because you think the whole thing's a settlement. Yeah, it's a little bit again. Like I get why
yeah,
from whether you're a secular Jew not living in Israel, whether you're a religious Jew living in Israel, whoever, you're thinking to yourself, where am I going to go? You know what I mean? Am I going to take the first fucking train back to Berlin? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. And so this is just this is horrible, and is certainly something I would never defend. Um, but like this is what happens when like you when you go to war, right? Like war. Sorry, when you escalate a conflict, um, to this current battle. When you go into a battle, then everyone starts looking at it as an enemy. There's a bloodlust that takes over people, and they start seeing that like their actions are just justified. That we have to hurt the enemy. This is a good like thinking of all the pain that they have. They just inflict that onto others, and terrible look, just terrible look, and uh a horrible massacre. And yeah, the body count will go higher. Video shows Israeli racing across vast open fields and taking cover in orchards. The number of fatalities and injuries. The massacre is unclear. However, Channel 12 the bodies of dozens of party goers have been recovered. Hamas launched a highly coordinated surprise attack. Blah blah blah. Israel, of course, confirmed Monday that over 700 Israelis have been killed since Hamas launched the attacks from Gaza early Saturday morning. Another 2150 were wounded. The assault came on Simchat Torah, a normally joyous day when Jews complete the annual cycle of reading the Torah scroll. The Gaza Ministry of Health said Sunday that 370 Palestinians had died and 2,200 were wounded in Israeli counterattacks. This is also like, yeah, this is the anniversary of Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur War, right? Or no, I don't want to say it. Never mind. I think
Yeah, yeah. I'm not positive.
it's
It could
anniversary of
be.
not. Yeah, no, I don't know where Yom Kippur is.
Oh,
For
okay.
I'm
No,
sorry.
yeah. Armed conflict, October 6th or 25th. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, but anyway, it's around this anniversary, so it was a surprise attack on Israel. Um, but yeah, uh, when these things start, the and it happens in every conflict. Like who is the enemy? How do you tell? Right, especially if
Yeah.
there's no clear guidelines. And it seems like Hamas is not providing those clear guidelines, and I think there's going to be more of this.
Oh, okay, but and as much can be said, in my opinion, at least about the Israelis, in that they're saying, their whole thing is it's Hamas backed. They're telling people to leave Gaza, the Hamas backed parts of Gaza. Gaza controls Hamas,
Yeah,
or sorry, Hamas controls Gaza. Could you not then just say, in the same way that they're saying here, oh, okay, you're safe in Israel as long as you're not a settler, and you're a settler if you're a Jew. So Jews will then say, okay, well, am I not safe in Israel? Okay, well then do the same thing. As long as you're not Hamas and you're in Gaza, you're safe. Of course, that does mean, of course, if you're in Gaza, you're Hamas, or at least you're Hamas backed or Hamas linked or Hamas adjacent. Of course, you're Hamas adjacent because it's 25 fucking miles long. You're adjacent to everybody else that fucking lives there because we're gonna live. I do need to hop off here.
Yeah.
7:30 was like my little get off here, but I did
Yeah.
want to read this. There's a quotation, like I was saying from earlier, from the Black Jacobins that I wanted to read here that I thought was really, really good. And it's doing like this is just to give a historical picture. This is talking about in Haiti. It's very brutal, one of the most brutal slave system in all of the from more or less in all of the transatlantic world. And there was a massive revolution that happened at the exact same time as the French Revolution. And the French, it's French, French whites versus this mixed race cast of slaves and freedmen and colored people and stuff. And this is a book that's talking about that, giving a reference here. And I think that this little sentence right here explains the psychology. You think to yourself, how could somebody go into a music festival and open fire? And this explains the psychology. If you want to stop it, you have to understand it. I'm not justifying it, as we just said here earlier. Hamas does not, even by their own standard, this is not justified. By their own standard, this is not justified. But this is talking about this. This is talking about Haiti. The slaves destroyed tirelessly, like the peasants in the Jacquerie or the Luddite wreckers. They were seeking their salvation in the most obvious way possible, the destruction of what they knew was the cause of their suffering. And if they destroyed much, it was because they had suffered much. They knew that as long as these plantations stood, that their work to be a labor on them until they dropped, that they were to work and be a labor on them until they dropped. The only thing was to be destroyed was them. From their masters, they had known rape, torture, degradation, and at the slightest provocation, death. They returned, and this is the really important part. They returned in kind. For 2 centuries, the higher civilization had shown them that power was used for wrecking your will on those who you controlled. Now they had power, and they did as they had been taught. I think this is a really important way of looking at these things. I'm not, it's not an attempt to child make the Palestinians or the Haitians as children. But again, if you live for hundreds of decades being told this is the wonderful advanced civilization, you should be like them, we should stop being the militants, and then you get treated with brutality. When you get power, as it says, you're just going to behave in the way that you've seen other people behave with power. When power is used like you as a club, you pick up power, you use it like a club towards others. And it made me very, very clear, like I said before, random Israeli person going to a concert, random German person going to a concert, they had nothing to do with any of this. They got clocked in to society as much as any of us here. If you decide you want to go join the IDF, if you want to go and do certain things and you want to engage in the conflict, that's something else. But if you're just a person, I don't think that you're part of that conflict. But if you're part of that conflict and if you created that dynamic, that's the situation. So, again, I'm sure you can sympathize. While you want to remain true to your sense of justice, while also remaining true to your sense of horror at sometimes what can come with a lack of justice.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been seeing when I see all of this, when I see all these videos. You know,
Yeah. When there is when negotiation just doesn't exist, like this is going to be the result, right? Where you simply there is no political solution because that's been those avenues have been closed off to you. Then this is going to be a result, and not that I endorse it. I certainly not. I don't endorse violence. I don't want these people dead. But like I just want to have a complete look at the situation. And hopefully some good will come from this.
you know,
But
like with any of these situations, the people that end up suffering the most are men, women, and the elderly. Or sorry, women, children, and the elderly.
yeah,
Not to be sexist here, pretending that all men are just like little they can just take for themselves. Obviously, a man being killed, 25-year-old man being killed is tragic as much as a 25-year-old woman being killed or whatever. But it's, in the way that the things work, at the end of the day, it's going to be the people that can't get out, that don't have family to help them, that are going to get destroyed. They're going to be fucked with. If you're a fucking jihadist, you know what you do? You run up into the fucking mountains. You just leave. You fucking go. It's the war of the flea. What happens when the dog starts biting at the area where the flea bites? The flea runs to the other part of the dog, right? But if you're already there, if you can't leave for whatever, if you can't run away, you get bitten by the dog. And so, that is the downside. There's a statement. Irish revolutionaries during the 70s, they went and they were talking with Algerian revolutionaries about how to free themselves. And the Algerians basically said, sometimes you need to swim amongst this is a very common saying amongst like left-wing revolutionaries, swim amongst the people like a fish, immerse yourself in the society and kind of like just arise out of the society and do little terrorist attacks and then like immerse yourself back into the society. But what the Irish revolutionaries made, and I think the Irish have a similar situation because they're on an island, they have very little place to go, right? is they said, we know what happens when the fisherman can't catch the fish with a fish hook, and he can't catch it with a
Dynamite.
spear, and he can't catch it with a net. He
Hmm.
poisons the water. And I
Oh,
think that's the really big thing you have to remember here is these fish, these little fish can come up and bite the ankles of the IDF, but they're going to swim back to the bottom of the lake. And what are the IDF going to do? They're going to put electrical rods in the water.
yeah,
And any fish that can't go deep, what happens to those fish?
yeah.
So that's what I was saying.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. There's so much more to say. More I want to like give that journalist want to talk about that, but I know you got to go. But thank you, friend.
Hey,
For
thank you for the opportunity for the discussion. It's always a pleasure to be able to. I know, obviously I was joking at the beginning, but to be able to take the things I think about and push them against somebody that has as much of an interest and much of a passion for this is something that I find
yeah,
infinitely useful.
absolutely. Let's send you off
Oh,
to
before I'm putting in chat, fantastic YouTube interview here. This came out about a month ago. It's a little hard to find right now in the YouTube algorithm because if you search up Palestine, obviously the only thing that comes up right now. But this is a 2-hour interview. It's a little bit pro Saudi, but it gives a really good overview of just the geopolitics that led to this scenario. Takes you out a little bit of the propaganda, in my opinion. It's a really good video.
all right. Off you guys go to our to Chapo Trap House because I there's raiding, so I don't know. And thanks so much. You sent me that video just now.
Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Well.